Could you build a
So,
business that's better for our planet? That's what I have set out to answer. Hi, I'm Marco Pimentel, marketing expert and entrepreneur, and host of the podcast Someone Like You. I've become fascinated in finding creative climate solutions in business, and on the podcast, I break down how founders and CEOs are building climate-friendly business solutions that are opportunities for growth while being better for the planet.
Where the market really needs to move away from is trying to create hyper-realistic versions of something that it needs to replace. I can see where that facilitates creating that path towards a new alternative. But at the end of the day, what do people really want? They want great tasting products. They want things that have a good texture. They want things that have more than adequate but optimized nutritional profiles. They want things that they can afford.
The global population is expected to grow to 10 billion people by 2050. And one of the biggest challenges the next generation is going to face is just feeding everyone. Deeply concerned with those challenges, today's guest, Marc St-Onge, decided to look for solutions by creating a series of global platforms for the development of sustainable fermentation-based protein and food ingredients with his company, Smallfood. As the CEO, he found a solution to the feeding crisis by using an uncommon ingredient, microbes. By leveraging its potential to evolve, he and his team were able to facilitate nutritious, animal-free, vegan, and environmentally friendly food for various companies. Marc speaks about what made him choose this path for his company, the impact of biotechnology on the food industry, and how we should be paying closer attention to the environmental consequences of the food production systems we now have in place. With a decade's worth of research and over 20,000 unique microorganisms discovered, Smallfood has been able to produce food ingredients abundant in high-quality protein, omega-3, with lower impacts on the environment, showcasing that a way of doing things differently in the market can be done. I wanted to take a second to tell you about our Season 2 sponsor, Digital Scope. Did you know your website has a carbon footprint? Well, digital technology has a larger carbon footprint than the entire aviation industry, and it's only getting bigger. Digital power consumption is increasing by 9% every year. At this rate, our digital carbon footprint could be responsible for as much as 14% of global emissions by 2040. If you're a digital-first company, or really any company with a website, and want to understand the impact your website is having on the environment, Digital Scope can translate visitor data into carbon measurement, all with a simple one line of code added to your website. Check out digitalscope.com/someonelikeYou. The first 100 people to sign up get free access for an entire year. If we think back to early career, so think maybe out of university or first job, did you ever think that you would be working in a sustainability or climate space and building a business like Smallfood?
I definitely not. And it's not a lack of, I would say growing up, I was always very nature oriented. I had a very strong connection to the outdoors, appreciation for, what that brought into my life. But, I think going through university at Dalhousie, it's kind of more trained to think of biological sciences, and which of course this, obviously is implicated in the whole kind of climate conversation. But I don't no one was sounding the alarm bells back then. It wasn't permeating, into the consciousness of a lot of people. And, I've always been kind of like that curious entrepreneur. I like solving problems, but where, the first part of my journey that ultimately led to Smallfood was more working in the health and wellness space. So I actually had, like I said, studying kind of biological sciences, but I had a personal journey that led me into ultimately my first entrepreneurial ventures into health and wellness. And it started from a period of where I didn't have my health and well-being. I went through, about 5 or 6 years of unexplained illness, a lot of self-discovery, a lot of new doors opening, a lot of shifting of perspectives, a a lot of then starting to appreciate, how the interworkings of the body and how everything works in harmony, and how it's also important for us to have that relationship and the harmonization with our environment, especially the natural environment. So I think, there was, the elements were there for eventually really starting to feel more connected to solving larger, questions like the climate crisis. But it was really in natural health products in particular that, kind of propelled me onto my entrepreneurial path.
And so those products or that company, how did that kind of jump go from what you were doing in entrepreneurship to creating this idea for Smallfood?
Okay, yeah. So a big part of that chapter of my life, I founded a business called Ascenta Health. It was natural health supplements, mostly based on omega-3 fatty acids, which are a key component of producing, well-being in the body. And so, that was kind of like the product platform. But then I started noticing, as I was kind of learning and evolving as an entrepreneur, that may have been the product solution, but I was using my commercial platform to tell a much broader narrative about why it's important that we need to create health and well-being of our environment. And so from there, I learned about 1% for the Planet, which is an amazing organization that was co-founded by Yvon Chouinard. And Yvon Chouinard, founder of Patagonia, of course. I started reading a lot of his books, which were so inspirational and educational for me. And, I think as well, like getting involved with some of the organizations that we were supporting through 1% for the Planet, like the David Suzuki Foundation, Environmental Defense, the Nova Scotia Nature Trust, and the Ecology Action Center, some of the really key ones that we developed deeper relationships. So we weren't just handing over checks to say, look, great work, keep going. It was really, how can we be a more active participant as a corporation who cares? And so we got to know the inner workings, like what is day-to-day life like in an environmental not-for-profit? What were some of the campaigns, the problems that they were trying to solve, and how can we actually use our commercial platform and voice and audience to help, propel those stories into more the mainstream. Yeah, so that's where you start seeing the emergence of kind of, we're building a platform to support, the necessary kind of environmental and climate narrative. But like that company, I kind of felt like we completed that chapter. We did a lot of amazing things, including we actually were the sponsor of what was called the Blue Dot Tour, which was really an effort to update the Canadian Charter to enshrine, legal rights to clean water, clean soil, clean air kind of thing. But then I decided that I needed to move on to the next chapter. So I did end up exiting that business. And that business still is thriving today and growing and doing lots of amazing things. But I knew that the next chapter for me was going to look a bit different. I wanted a product technology solution that kind of fit more succinctly right into the, that solving for climate as well as, food and well-being. So that was really the impetus or the background that kind of led to the emergence of Smallfood.
And so you knew that, you closed that one chapter and time to start another chapter with the kind of a basis of what you wanted to get into. How did that initial idea for Smallfood kind of come to be? And what was the first kind of steps or aha moment of like, this is what I'm going to start building with Smallfood?
Back in the previous business, so once again, going back to Ascenta Health, our focus was on omega-3 fatty acids, which typically, were derived from, ocean fish. Mm-hmm. And, so as being kind of a corporation that was trying to create awareness around some of these kind of environmental issues, we knew intimately how fisheries were heading down a very unsustainable path. And so really putting at risk all the valuable, nutrition that comes from the ocean, including protein, as well as omega-3s. Fish and seafood, represents one of the major protein sources for the planet. I think 70% of the population, fish is part of it, the staple diet. I also at the same time had this real strong fascination with microbes, and, microbes being, the world's most energy efficient biological production systems. The challenge with microbes though is finding the right microbe for the right application. So as I kind of bring a little bit the omega-3 story and the wellness story into this new chapter, like, wow, amazing if we could discover a microbe that could basically make, I'll say, unsustainable fishing obsolete, right? All these extraction-based fisheries that are causing more harm to the ocean, putting the entire global seafood supply chain at risk, along with the other threats, to our oceans. At the same time, bringing these valuable nutritional ingredients, to the world. Like today, we don't have sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. Then we're going to add, another 2 billion people to the population. How on earth are we going to be able to expand our seafood supply and those seafood calories to support our growing population? And that really is how I stepped into Smallfood, knowing that, microalgae fermentation had so much potential. There were companies, of course, already in this space doing some pretty amazing things, but nevertheless, there were still a lot of limitations as to what they could do, how big they could expand, or what markets they could really even serve. And so we needed to, create a technology platform that was really going to be that next generation of deploying these oceanic single cell organisms, to expand the world's global seafood supply.
Wow. And so to take a bit of a step back to understand your experience within your other business, you were using omega-3s and maybe just for people listening to understand, most of the omega-3s come from fish and those fish are probably farmed maybe or maybe they're wild. I'm sure there's kind of both ways. Fish, when they're farm raised, they need a ton of fish. I think it's like a 4-to-1 ratio. So, it uses, it's just unsustainable. You got to catch fish to then feed farm fish that then get, you take your omega-3s to add into your products. And then we're talking about also just protein. So how, and where did you think that the opportunity is with microbes? Are you thinking this is a replacement for anytime we need omega-3s? Is this also, comes down to protein and I guess protein powders? Like what was it specifically that you were trying to kind of hone in on?
Initially, it was the alternative protein, challenge. How can we bring the next generation protein, a much more sustainable form of protein, to the food industry? And when you start to appreciate the amount of diversity that exists out there in the world of microorganisms that maybe reside both in aquatic systems as well as terrestrial systems, you have this incredible gene pool that has the ability to produce endless number of solutions to a lot of our, food and biomaterial challenges on the planet. And like I said, they are the most energy efficient biological production systems. But how do you find that, that microbe that's going to, solve the problem that you're looking to do? And so this is where, the deep technology aspect, comes into it. So we defined what that perfect microbe would look like. What are the nutritional specifications? At the same time, you have to be selecting for metabolic and growth traits. Because at the end of the day, if you're looking to solve for lower valued metabolites, so fermentation, for instance, typically it's being used to produce high value metabolites. Why? Because it's quite costly to, there's a large CapEx component to building the infrastructure to support, this kind of large scale fermentation. And now you're saying, well, we're actually going to produce somewhat low valued, metabolites like proteins and fats. Well, you're going to need an extremely efficient microbe, a very, very fast grower, and a microbe that will be conducive to scaling to very, very large. So a lot of times you take microbes from their natural environment and you can't really domesticate them. So with that technical specification, we assembled a large, extremely large proprietary library of microbes. And we looked at, yeast and, fungi and bacteria and microalgae. So there's over 20,000 unique microorganisms that were screened. And, it's using kind of like this leading edge kind of bioinformatics, platform. We're able to find the best candidate within that particular library. And this one checked all of those boxes. So that was great, So the next step is like, you have to see like, how can you domesticate? Can you grow this in a flask? Can you grow this in a bench scale fermenter? Which, in this particular case, this organism, translated very well to a controlled environment. And when we started to look at all the different metabolites it was producing, we realized not only does it produce the perfect protein, it also is producing those valuable long-chain omega-3s, EPA and DHA, which, of course, naturally would come from, fish sources, fish and seafood. So we had a really unique proposition here. Is that, okay, this is more of a co-product solution. When you kind of compared it to actual seafood like fish, it says, they're extremely similar. So from a nutritional perspective, we know instead of feeding someone fish or seafood, you could feed them this microalgae biomass. However, that is, people maybe enjoy eating seafood. But when you grow this microalgae and you harvest it and you dry it down, it really looks like soy protein. That's the best kind of description I can give it. That in itself is not really a foodstuff. People will not just kind of eat a microalgae powder. So from there, we had to develop, new technologies, additional technologies that could take that ingredient and make that next generation of sustainable, high nutrition, cost-effective alternative seafoods. And that was really how we started kind of, wrapping these really unique attributes of this microalgae to solving for really the crux of this is like, we're trying to displace wild capture fish from food supply chains as well as feed supply chains. And you mentioned this earlier, a lot of the fish that are extracted from the ocean, they're going into feeding animals, including a lot of that going to feeding salmon. And so today, the aquaculture annual biomass is actually greater than the amount of fish that are extracted from the ocean for human consumption. But the interesting story here is that, decades ago, they were, extracting anchovies and sardines primarily from South America, and that was being rendered into fish feed. And yeah, I think it was around 4 kilograms of these forage fish just to produce 1 kilogram of salmon that would go to market. Now, the industry, of course, saw that was going to be a limiting factor. How can aquaculture get to extremely large scale that it is today while trying to take more fish out of the ocean? Because the Peruvian anchoveta and sardine industry was already fish at its upper limit. There were no more fish that they could extract. So what did they do? Well, they used a lot of research and science to figure out how can they reduce the amount of fish meal and fish oil that goes into a salmon diet. And so they actually found out, it's kind of like, what is the minimum viable nutrition that we can feed an animal and that it still survives and we can actually grow it to the point where we can get it to market? Well, it sounds great in terms of, instead of 4-to-1, it's about a 1.5 or 2-to-1 fish meal, fish oil to produce that 1 kilo of market salmon. But there was a huge downside to that, because now they're feeding the salmon things that are unnatural for a salmon diet. They're feeding it soy meal, They're feeding it, renders from other animal slaughter. They're feeding it, wheat. So now the salmon are being fed an unnatural diet. And of course, that's going to have physiological consequences. And so a lot of people concerned today, and I hear in the news, salmon farms, the incidence of disease, the incidence of mortality, the medications that are critical to incorporate into the feed so that the salmon, are able to resist to a certain degree the amount of disease, causing organisms. It's not working in harmony with nature. So if we are going to continue to grow salmon in aquaculture, we need to do it in a more responsible way. We need to bring it out of the oceans and back onto land. We need to also radically change the feed so that we actually promote animal welfare. We also promote animal health and nutrition. And that was really, how we started some of the research studies to say, okay, could our biomass, it shows similar nutritional attributes, but, salmon grows so well on fish meal and fish oil. Would our biomass, be able to replicate that? And so we're working with Dalhousie University. We've actually into our third trial. So in the first two trials, really, outstanding results that fish that are fed a diet based on the small food biomass, this microalgae biomass, are super healthy. They have great nutritional attributes, and they're actually growing faster than the fish meal, fish oil. It's almost like this is a superfood that we're not harvesting it from the sea, but the microbe that originally came from the sea, we're growing it in fermenters. But that concept of a superfood really does apply based on the outcomes of these feeding trials. And so that's where we think that we can play a huge role in solving a major constraint and challenge to the aquaculture industry. At the same time, a major challenge for the health and the long-term viability of our oceans to perform, these important kind of ecosystem services, but also feed the world sufficient seafood calories in a sustainable way.
And I'm, wow, 20,000 different microbes and options. And then, all these trials and testing and trying to develop all of this. How did you make that jump from an idea and how did you fund this part? So like, did you partner with the university to say like, this is my kind of thesis, let's start doing microbe reviews for finding a protein? Did you get some funding from the government and grants? Like how did you go from that initial part of that story to being able to look into all of this?
When I sold the previous business, I kind of knew the type of technologies that I wanted to define or start building that next chapter. So as part of my entrepreneurial past, I'm always following kind of the latest science and research. I'm always, building my networks with companies that are doing really innovative things. The core technology for small food, I actually acquired from another biotechnology company. And so it was really the discovery of the work that they were doing and then forming a vision around how can I take that technology in its, early state, build that scientific research and development team to continue to take the baton and continue to do the necessary research to kind of prove this out and ultimately establish, the markets that we could produce, products and meet those market demands. So it really, I think I started doing the research around this technology platform in 2016. I then formed Smallfood in 2018 through, the full acquisition of the technology. Started building the team at that point. So of course that takes a decent amount of capital. So at the same time, of course, like all other startups, you're building your list of different investors that you can pitch, hoping to find ones that really gravitate towards your vision and mission, those impact-oriented investors. I think especially at the early stage, it's critical that they really buy into your vision and that, they will feel like the success of this venture is going to be primarily measured by the amount of impact it can create, in solving these big, in this case, food and climate challenges. So we probably did 4 years of critical research to get the technology platform to the level where we could actually have a solution that, checked the box of, is it nutritious in terms of for feeding animals as well as feeding humans? Is it scalable? Is it cost effective? And so where we stand today, we have a very validated technology. We've had some very successful trials. On the food side, the same thing. We're trying to displace the need to have these unsustainable extractive fisheries that are depleting the oceans by creating the next generation of sustainable, nutritious alternative seafood. And most people have kind of maybe seen, who have been following Smallfood, know that we're part of a team that is an X Prize finalist. And X Prize, if anyone doesn't know, they're a nonprofit organization that puts out these grand challenges. What are the things that are critical to solve for the future, viability and prosperity of the human race and our planet? They've had anything from, of course, a lot of direct climate, like carbon capture projects, space exploration. In this case, they had one focused on how do we feed the next billion people on this planet. That was really centered around creating, teams could create either a whole breast chicken, or a fish fillet. And of course, fish fillet was a logical choice for us. And the competition really has gone through multiple phases. I think it really started with close to 1,000 global entries. It's now whittled down to the top 6 in the world. So clearly there's something about our technology that is, aligning with this goal of the X Prize Foundation to produce a fish fillet that has the taste, the texture, the nutrition, scalable, cost parity to conventional seafood, because that, it's extremely challenging, but that's what it's going to take to feed the next billion, because the next billion people that are going to arrive on this planet, primarily in developing nations, right? So, creating, these alternative seafood products that, you could probably you would expect to see in the highest end restaurants around the world, serving the 0.1%. That doesn't make a lot of sense. That's not really solving any problems. Like, we need cost effective, accessible nutrition, for this growing planet. So that's why solving for human food was equally as important for us. This is really about going back to how do we preserve, sustain our oceans, allow them to flourish while still, providing the nutrition that we need for, the broader global population.
Every week on Someone Like You, we dive into stimulating conversations with founders, entrepreneurs, business owners, and the likes who are consciously and successfully creating sustainable business solutions for the long haul. Tune in every week for a new inspiring conversation on leading climate solutions. And if you're enjoying the podcast, don't forget, please subscribe on the platform of your choice and give us a rating and a review. And the business model, you touched on it a couple of times, but the business model and where you think you're going to be going, because obviously, like you said, you're in this trial stage. Is you have a path of potentially being food for fish, like let's say land-based aquaculture, how do you feed those fish? So small food has potential application there, and then you're talking about a fish fillet. So that's obviously a consumer product. So what do you think that the business model is going to be as you develop and further get your trials into a kind of a business ready state?
We see Smallfood as an ingredient company. We see us as the catalyst for certain industries to really kind of grow and develop further. So on the human food side, if you look at the first generation of alternative seafood products, what you see is companies that are trying to emulate a certain taste and texture. What they really are not doing very well is providing adequate nutrition. So, there's some brands out there that labeled as plant-based seafood without having any seafood ingredients. And then secondly, they really struggle with either getting enough protein, or we almost see like virtually no inclusion of the long chain omega-3s, EPA and DHA, for obvious reasons. It's very, very costly to get algae-based long chain omega-3s, and then how do you stabilize those? So ultimately, I think all these brands are playing a role in helping to initiate this new category. Certainly, there have been market research groups that have projected very aspiring kind of growth. In 10 to 15 years, this will be a multi-billion-dollar industry. But today, it's very, very small. And part of the reason why it's so small is that there is such a gap between plant-based seafood and conventional seafood. The role that Smallfood can play is we have a single ingredient solution that is going to provide the highest quality protein along with high quality long chain omega-3s, along with a very pleasant seafood taste and aroma in a cost-effective, ingredient solution. So we like to see ourselves as kind of like the catalyst for the generation 2 and 3 of this alternative seafood movement. Yes, we've developed a lot of really appealing concepts and prototypes. We've done anything from sashimi to fish cakes to crab cakes. In the X Prize, we're developing a whole fish fillet. But the purpose and the intent here is to bring this as an ingredient solution and really support elevating the broader alternative seafood market. And then, of course, on the aquaculture side, we are not a feed producer. We don't plan to be a feed producer, but we do know that we have a very, very exciting new ingredient that anyone that is in, animal feed production and currently using, fish meal or fish oil, we're creating a path for them to port over into a truly sustainable, more traceable, ethical, but equally or even more efficacious solution to feeding those animals. So that also would be more of a B2B ingredient play.
Yeah, and it's quite smart because, like as you said, there are going to be, and there are already, a lot of companies that are building the brand to be the consumer-facing brand. But if you think about everything from current farming to meat to chicken products, there's definitely some brands that are out there, but largely those are ingredient companies. And I guess something like a Beyond Meat or an Impossible Burger, they're trying to do both, be the ingredient, but also be the brand as well. And so it definitely seems like there's a lot of room as this market grows to have companies that are being the ingredient company. And so the other just wild thing to think about, and we've had Wild Type also on our podcast before, and they're developing a sashimi based salmon as well, is like, what does this salmon fillet look like, and how does it come into an ingredient, and how does that kind of come to be? Because I can just see people listening to this being like, I don't understand, from how do you take a reactor microbes to salmon or crab cakes, and obviously that's the technology that you're building, but how does that come into be? How does that ingredient get created? Yeah.
So first of all, Wild Type is a really, exciting company in the alternative seafood space. I think I don't really see anyone really as competitors. I think we're all part of, a collaborative community that, I think is looking to celebrate wins across the board here. Obviously taking a different approach, and actually, growing actual fish cells in bioreactors. And, clearly, as anyone who's followed the industry knows, that culturing, animal cells has a lot of technical hurdles still to get through. And, but companies like Wildtype are working hard to try to address those technical barriers and cost barriers. The way that we approach this is, described earlier, like when it's produced, it looks like something like might be soy protein. So the way that we approach creating alternative seafood concepts is without the use of high pressure and high heat extrusion. We actually use a type of seaweed fiber that we can, react with our microalgae, ingredient to simulate what in your mouth is kind of like a taste and texture of a seafood fiber, so like a fish flake or something like that. And that is really, it's quite a simple process, and it allows us we're still using 100% seafood ingredients. I should also add that Smallfood is appropriately labeled as a seafood ingredient. We are actually Canada's first and only licensed single cell aquaculture producer. And the advantage there is like any brand that wants to incorporate our ingredient into their alternative seafood product can label it as seafood because they're using a seafood ingredient. In addition to that, it's a whole food ingredient, which is also, I think, important. When we're trying to take the lessons learned from, this rise to fame of like Beyond and Impossible, and then of course some of the challenges that they've been confronted with. There's a few things. There's always the, what is the cost premium versus the foods that you're trying to replace. But there's also this conversation around all these new next generation kind of quote unquote sustainable products are also highly processed. And I think if you look back, like going, I think, 10, 15 years ago, there was a trend that was emerging towards more whole food. How can we get our nutrition from less processed food ingredients? And I think that's a trend that's going to continue to persist. So I think one of the advantages is we can bring to the alternative seafood and other food categories is a whole food ingredient. And so once we've created this seafood-like texture, then you can really use different approaches to forming that into a patty for if you want to do a fish burger or a crab cake. It's very simple to do, and of course you're adding some other ingredients, like spices, some fresh vegetables, things like that. Doing work in more the fillet space, the whole cut fillets, obviously a lot more challenging, a lot of very intricate structures. Then you're kind of leaning more towards 3D printing technologies, which still today are not quite scalable, but there definitely are some advances that are being made in 3D food printing that should allow it to be reasonably scaled and still reasonably cost effective. Because no sense for us as an ingredient supplier that has worked so hard to be able to deliver a biomass that is actually more cost effective than conventional fish and seafood sources, than to apply that into a manufacturing process that does the opposite. It adds so much incremental cost that it's no longer ultimately serving the mission of feeding that next billion on the planet. So we can create very authentic, great tasting, seafood products in a very, very simple process using mostly whole food ingredients that it's still absolutely 100%, seafood. Most people are very surprised when they actually have a chance to try, different small food concepts. It's a very flexible ingredient. There's a lot of different paths that you can take to simulate different types of fish. Ultimately, I think where the market really needs to move away from is trying to create hyper-realistic versions of something that it needs to replace. Because there's maybe a lot of, I can see where that facilitates creating that path towards a new alternative. But at the end of the day, what do people really want? They want great tasting products. They want things that have a good texture. They want things that have more than adequate but optimized nutritional profiles. They want things that they can afford. So I think with microbes, not just microalgae, but all forms of microbes and the biomasses and the ingredients that can be developed from there, it's like this whole new palette for food developers to create the next generation of innovative, tastes and textures. We shouldn't be limited to just trying to replicate, salmon or, cod or any kind of animal-based product. I think there's a lot of excitement around what else can we do, especially when it comes down to 3D printing. I mean, 3D printing will allow us to create new food experiences, new tastes and textures, combination of different ingredients.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point, and the fact that all we're doing by trying to make sure that plant-based burger tastes the same as a McDonald's burger, or like you said, a piece of fish versus an algae type of fish, is we're just putting this odd pressure of trying to be exactly the same, rather than say this is new and this is nutritious and this can feed 1 billion people and it tastes really, really good, and here's how you do it. But no, it's not salmon. It's not cod. We don't have those resources to keep fishing the same way that we're doing, and this is a new innovative product. And we're so adept to using innovative products in our entire life. Yet when it comes to the food, there's this the brain and the consumer want it to be the same, and we do need to change that. And so, Marc, when you kind of sold your company, and obviously we didn't disclose how much you put into your own business to fund all of this. You've obviously did this, and you did this with obviously a lot of grit and time, and you've poured so much into this. This podcast is really inspired by this just children's book, The Lorax, in terms of its branding and kind of the storytelling of what happens when we overuse our resources, and you're building something that is directly colliding with this, because the seafood industry and everything we've done, we just keep taking and taking and taking. You've done a really hard thing as an entrepreneur, and what would you say to somebody that is thinking about getting involved in climate or in sustainability space? Either they're jumping in to invest, or they're thinking about starting a business, or they're thinking about joining a startup, and what would that advice be to them?
I think the big block with entrepreneurialism is it's psychological. It's the fear, and I think I don't want to lie to anyone and say it's going to be easy, because it's startup is not a linear path. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs. There's going to be definitely some moments where you're on top of the world and high-fiving, and then there's going to be a lot of moments where you will second guess, should I really be doing this? Is it going to work? What it comes down to is, I think as human beings, is we're moving into the meaningful economy, as I like to call it. So we need to really connect at that level, that kind of that heart level, to say, this is important to me. I believe so much in this. And if you actually orient all your effort towards meaningful goals, ultimately it's going to produce, positive outcomes. There's a lot of pressures, that will kind of quickly surround you, because, it's not just about, hey, here's an idea and I'm going to work on it and try to commercialize the product. No, you have to be able to attract the right people, like-minded people, build your tribe. You need to be able to bring investors in. And so you have a lot of these external forces, and they may not always be completely aligned. But when you start out as an entrepreneur in, the climate or food sustainability, or something that is really, really meaningful to you, you need to start with being able to fully describe, articulate, what is that impact vision? How will you want this journey to feel? What will success look like in 10 years? What are the core values that you're going to embed into your culture? Ultimately, what is that philosophical underpinning that makes this journey worth it, regardless of if it lasts for 3 years or 30 years. Because if you do not get that clarity from day one, you're quickly going to find you're going to attract the wrong people. You're going to attract the wrong investors. And you're not ever going to have that North Star that keeps you on that right path. Because even when you find yourself going through some tough times, it doesn't mean you're not going in the right direction. It's just solving problems like this is not going to be easy. But once you have established that North Star and connect back into the why am I doing this? Why was this meaningful? And remind yourself of that. That's really, for me, that's the recipe of success. I think that is, shifting the whole business climate from the me journey to the we journey. Like, it's not, you may have this idea, this belief that you have, and you want to use your entrepreneurial path or commercial platform to help express that belief. But you have to realize, like, this is the we economy. You need to have like-minded people. And so how are you going to attract those people and keep them engaged and focused and aligned around that North Star? So it's really figuring out that why from day one and being able to articulate that, document that, so you can share that with people.
The meaning economy. That is very, very well said. How can listeners find more information about Smallfood or yourself?
Smallfood, check out us at www.smallfood.com. Personally, I'm not that active these days on social media platforms. I've been living in the trenches for the last 4 years. Maybe it's about time that I kind of climb out of that and start engaging more, communicating more with the like-minded people that are also part of this amazing community of solving food and climate issues. But I am. You can find me on LinkedIn at just by searching Marc St-Onge. Yeah, always happy to engage and connect with other like-minded people, entrepreneurs. I think it's really important to build community and learning from others' experiences.
Well, Marc, thank you so much for joining us. It's an incredibly fascinating story of what you did in your past and how you really tackled a very, very, very challenging problem. We are rooting and cheering you on the X Prize. Obviously it's a great accomplishment already where you and your team have landed, and I'm excited one day to try some small food products. So thanks again for joining us, and all the best.
Thanks, Marco.
This podcast is co-produced with The Brand is Female. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode of Someone Like You. And if you did, please share this. We're a new podcast, and I would love it if you could share it with a family member, friend, colleague, work colleague. Share it on Slack, whoever you do. Just share and spread the message of these incredible brands. Please also support these type of companies. They're doing the hard thing, and the hard thing often takes a lot of people to get on board. And don't forget, please subscribe on the platform of your choice and give us a rating and review. I'm Marco Pimentel. Thank you for joining us today. For more information on Someone Like You, you can find us on Instagram at Someone Like You Podcast, with all the links to the podcast, our website, and more information about the brands that we feature. Thank you again.